if you look at this slide, I looked at this dog. I saw this dog in Mozambique, and it's a yellow dog. And I was reminded of what it means to be a yellow dog. It actually means to be a despicable thing, or a worthless thing, or person. And that is an expression that comes from the United States. So absolutely, so deeply embedded. Gilliam said yesterday, 20,000 years. And 20,000 years, I think, of also in many cases of abuse. And that is across the world. So I thought, there's so many things that you can say about not a dog's chance. What does it mean? It really means absolutely no chance, no possibility of succeeding, coming to pass, or achieving anything. So for me, as a rabies person, I've worked on African horse sickness, swine fever, blue tongue, foot and mouth disease, and so on. But eventually, rabies really became my passion and for canines. And for me, to see a jackal or a bat-eared fox in the wild is better than a big five. Anyway, so the problem that we sit with today, and if you look at this Chinese proverb, what it really says is that dogs are generally considered worthless, the non-viable species in economic terms. They can't make you money as in general, and we know that this is a key problem if we talk about rabies. So I would say this, and you would all be in agreement with me in this audience, that the key factors in the global rabies epidemic are the undervaluation and the chronic social and veterinary neglect of dogs. And this, I think, is why welfare is so critical to any aspirations for a rabies-free world. And this is why I think this discussion is so relevant. And what is interesting to me is that this neglect that we talk about, social and veterinary neglect, is nothing new. And it comes over many centuries. And it comes from places in the world which are now the most advanced regions of the world. You look at this, it's easy to find a stick to beat a dog. That means it's easy to attack a vulnerable thing or a vulnerable person. Maybe that is despicable human nature. But to attack something that's vulnerable, it's easy to find a stick to beat a vulnerable animal. And where does it come from? It comes primarily heard in the UK, first written by nobody other than William Shakespeare. In those words, a staff is quickly found to beat a dog, in the first publication of his plays in 1629. So this is a very long history, and it's nothing new. If we talk about a dog's life, what does it mean? It means miserable circumstances. That's what it means. As a given, if you're born a dog. And this is traced back to Erasmus, Desiderius Erasmus, or also known as Erasmus of Rotterdam. So it also comes from Europe, who pointed out the wretched existence of dogs in Europe in the mid-16th century as well as the 17th century. And from there, it's a dog's life, hunger and ease. And it certainly, again, by Rudyard Kipling was, it became a cliche in his time in around about the 1900s. So that is the problem that we sit with. So if we look at this picture, of course it doesn't show you the incidence of dog rabies. I mean, who would be interested in that? It shows you the incidence of human rabies, because that is how we hope to maybe get some traction for rabies elimination. But what is interesting about this map is that if you just go 2 centuries ago, it would be turned around. And everything that is now red would have been red over here in Europe and parts of America, whereas the entire continental Africa and much of Southeast Asia would be gray, no rabies. Well, this is something that you all know. It was spread essentially mostly during the and during the colonial era. So if we look at these, at how we advocate for rabies, so you know these figures, your 59,000 is being used, children can be prevented. We look at the news, it says preventable rabies kills so many people, this is a tragedy, and so on and so forth. We look at all of these materials that we use and we say, yes, every 10 minutes or every 9 minutes somebody dies, over 99% caused by dogs. We look at everything, we see 2.9 million people could have been saved, and so on. And so the economic argument is similar. It is the cost of, mostly the cost of premature death and direct costs to human health. Nothing on dogs. And that really is the question. Because if we look at the scientific data, well, it confirms what we know. Rabies is not a human disease. Rabies is an animal disease, and it's primarily a disease of dogs. And so for every human case, you have at least 50, likely many more, 100 and more cases of rabies in dogs. And so that is a question one can ask. What about the dogs? So again, chronic social and veterinary neglect. And again, I want to tie in what you are doing here in ICAM and in the welfare community and at this meeting. So I think this is where the role of animal welfare is so particularly relevant, so important, is key. And this is where everybody has to work together. And I think that your increased involvement in rabies, whereas a couple of years ago it would not have been that obvious, and one would question, why? Well, rabies. But I think the penny has dropped, and I think your involvement is incredibly progressive. So let me just skip this slide and go to the issue of One Health. I think this now offers us opportunities. Let me go back to the previous slide and just point out, so this is what we talked about, this wonderful discussions on Latin America yesterday, where there's an increase in dog vaccination, but also in human post-exposure prophylaxis, whereas Asia and Africa are really lagging. Africa lagging both in vaccination, so responsible dog ownership, as well as post-exposure prophylaxis for humans. Asia better in PEP, but equally bad in terms of responsible dog ownership and vaccination coverage. So One Health does offer an opportunity to try and bring back some of these injustices on the various different levels that I have elucidated. And I think the one thing I said I'll mention is this United Against Rabies, a global strategic plan. So it evolved from the 2015 meeting where the global framework was decided, and from there, this business plan or action plan was developed by the 4 partners, the World Health Organization, FAO, OAE, and the Global Alliance for Rabies Control. So this plan was discussed on many fora. I can say, if you look at it's a good plan. What it really is, it's a global catalytic initiative to achieve a common goal, to set a common goal and to achieve that. So it would be shared and it would be a defined and an agreed goal. And I think we get a lot of traction for that. I think there's an understanding that this is an achievable goal. And that is the main purpose of this plan, is to tie everybody together. It's a good plan, as I say, it has different phases, with different countries in different phases. This is not prescriptive, but these are ideas of how these phases may be best advanced. The plan itself is in detail available on all the websites, so the 4 different groups. So if you go to OAE, you can download the whole plan and look at that, and it's been there since World Rabies Day last year. So it's been there now for exactly a year. And same on the FAO website, you can go and look at all the documentation, WHO website. It's there. Global Alliance for Rabies Control website, it is there. So it's not my purpose to go into some of the details of this plan. Obviously, we, in any event, don't have the time. But I would encourage you to go and have a look at that plan, look at the operational details of the plan, and work out where you can contribute to this plan, which we would like to see that you then become an official partner of the United Against Rabies collaboration. If you go to look at the plan, I'm just highlighting some of the things. In the very first objective, you can see right there the responsible dog ownership is an issue, and then all of the sub issues that comes with that. And the objective 2, promote dog population management, movement control, contraceptive technology, and so on, and all of the components that follow up on that. Again, all of this information available on the websites, and my mission today is to invite you to have a good look at this, define how you can play a role, and let's work out how to become partners in this initiative. What instead of going into this detail I wanted to do is ask, but is this plan based on the right principles? And I said, well, to investigate, let's look at the only 2 other diseases ever eradicated. And let's see what they did. And of course, one of them is smallpox, the first one. Now, smallpox, you can argue, highly contagious, highly visible, deadly disease, affected everybody. 7 reigning monarchs in Europe died from smallpox, so you would argue that it's an easy case to make. Okay. So how about rinderpest? Again, major threat to food production, responsible for huge economic losses. So it was an easy case to make. So I would say much easier case for those 2 than rabies. But still, I think it's worth looking at lessons to be learned. And so I looked at that and compared the 2 and looked at 5 critical factors in this eradication successes. And so the first is international coordination and strategy. That was critical. Feasibility, national governments, communities, surveillance, research, and tools. And it's as simple as that. And I wanted to just go into each of this very briefly, basically saying that these components are in the plan and we need to build on them as much as we can and to try and do that together. So firstly, the critical thing for smallpox and rinderpest was international coordination. So this is it. the international global strategy. So that is the coordination mechanism. What about feasibility? Yes, we've seen from Latin America, which at the moment is the poster boy in rabies. Look what they've done in Mexico. Yes, dog vaccination stops rabies transmission from dogs to humans. So it's feasible, it's been shown, it's been demonstrated in Europe, North America, Japan, elsewhere in Southeast Asia, and in Latin America. So feasibility, no issue. How about communities? So for smallpox, and India was particularly difficult, but this is how it was achieved by, again, what we last night, the discussion on children. I learned to respect dogs as a child from my parents, and they learned that from their parents. And that is how it's going to work. And in the Philippines, we've managed to integrate rabies into the curriculum, the national curriculum, for children from nursery school right through to grade 10. So this affects 21 million children and their parents and their teachers and so on. I'm giving you some examples, and I think these are the things that we need to promote. Many of you, the good work that you do, also as we are in Africa, in different countries in Africa, with education a cornerstone of getting the communities involved. So awareness for communities. This, to me, is a wonderful picture because all of this is community driven. This comes from Unguja Island, Tanzania. I am particularly pleased about this project because it was driven by this woman, a strong Muslim woman who drove that entire project, get those communities together, drive them, not only the vaccination, but she's also in charge of the diagnostic laboratory, doing the diagnostics, making sure samples come in, make sure there's good proficiency, and make sure they keep a track of progress. Unfortunately, we lost her now to one of the UK universities, but there's succession plans, and we hope that this region will become the next region in Africa to officially declare rabies freedom. Very thankful for work done by World Animal Protection over many years. I just want to say why I put this in the community section. The support, outside support for these projects was minimal. It was really minimal. There was some, but it was catalyzing. It was strategic. And everything was driven by the community and by nations. If I look at smallpox, guess who paid for smallpox eradication? 70% of the entire expense on smallpox was paid from the individual countries on average. There's no such thing as we need to find the money. It has to come from within. And we know that it can, and it can work. So if we look at education, and one of my colleagues will talk about this just now, so I'm not going to say anything about it, just you know about these education certificates and the impact that it has. We think that we need this kind of thing as an amplifier. So every rabies educator educates 100 people. Some of them become rabies educated people, and and the key component of rabies education is responsible dog ownership. I believe that the dog owner is critical in the whole rabies eradication, and it's perhaps the most critical factor. And World Rabies Day, of course, as you know, is a factor for us to try and create awareness, and this has been quite successful over the last 13 years. It's been running for 13 years now and making strides. Now, in terms of surveillance, I think people are joking or take the mickey out of me about surveillance. I've heard that, look, I'm quite a stickler for measuring things. I believe that this is critically important, and so I've heard some of my friends, task force and so on, call this the South African factor. Be it as it may, I feel, and Dr. Andrew Rowan, this ties in with something that he said yesterday. I think if you don't measure it, you cannot manage it. You definitely cannot improve it. And so I don't think you shouldn't tell me how good your work is if you cannot then demonstrate the impact in a scientifically rigorous manner. That is. So surveillance to me is a critical thing, and it's one of the areas that are most lacking in rabies. This is one of the things that holds us back. And I was pleased to read, so D.A. Henderson, he's the big guy in smallpox, and that is what he said. From the beginning of the program, surveillance was a basic strategy of the campaign. As expected, proved to be the ultimate quality control measure, the guide to improved operations, and the yardstick of progress. Exactly. And that's what we don't have in rabies. It's severely underreported. There's very limited surveillance. We talk about the cycle of neglect. We go around and we can vaccinate hundreds of thousands and millions of dogs, but we don't know the impact if we have no baseline information. So this is a Fermi paradox in rabies. I mean, we know scientifically rigorous models show us the number of cases out there, but we don't see them. We know they're there, but we don't see them. So we lose visibility. So the Rabies Epidemiological Bulletin, to some extent, addresses that, and one of my colleagues will talk about that a little bit more, and how these things are applied in the rabies control networks. I'm pleased to say that if you look at Africa, so that is the Pan-African Rabies Control Network, 70% of those countries now use the Rabies Epidemiological Bulletin and regularly report data, but much more than just case data, more. So I think we are turning the tide. The other networks are fairly new in terms of the Asian Rabies Control Network and the Middle East and Eastern Europe network, so that we can change this from insufficient data to sufficient data, from under-resourced to resourced, and to strong programs. So I think all can see the relevance of that. The final piece of the puzzle, if we look at these eradication efforts, would be research and tools. And again, I learned from smallpox. And this was interesting. And people would not always appreciate this, maybe from the hierarchies of some organizations, but these are facts. So what he wrote in his memoirs, he says, research initiatives were encouraged at every level. And this occurred despite the opposition of senior WHO leadership who insisted that all the tools are there. We don't need nothing. Just go out and plan and do it properly and so on. So what I'm saying is this is wrong, and that is what I like about seeing new tools develop, scientific, rigorous tools that can assist. One of these is the stepwise approach to rabies elimination. And in the last 2 years, we've had 53 countries going through the stepwise approach to rabies elimination, which ultimately allows them to develop a detailed national work plan that is not a generic thing, but is based on the actual situation in that country. And all of these new tools in the rabies field are being updated onto the rabies blueprint, to the canine rabies blueprint. We had a meeting in July in London. All of the major developers of tools coming together, analyzing these tools, putting them into categories, and this now goes on to the rabies blueprint, and we hope to have that out in the next couple of months. I think it's going to be incredibly helpful going forward. So finally then, building an enabling environment. I think these networks are critically important to advance these concepts, and I thank all of the many members present here for your support and understanding of the importance of these networks, right through from the Partners for Rabies Prevention to the rabies control networks in the different parts of the world. I'm looking forward to tomorrow's World Rabies Day things. I hope as many of you as possible can make it. I think we should show a strong resolve, and I'm certainly looking forward to be there. So I'm going to end. This is my final slide, and we've said so many things about dogs, and there's so many not so nice things, like to die like a dog, for example. And then these things are so ingrained. But dogs never give up. That's the one real positive thing about dogs, never give up. And neither should we. Thank you very much. Okay.